What is going on? Welcome to this episode of EST, the podcast for established church leaders by established church leaders. If you're listening on your podcast app or watching on YouTube, we are so glad you are part of the conversation. My name is Josh.
My name is Sam, and I am glad to be out of this storm that I mentioned on the last episode. But since we're recording these back to back, it stopped raining. Yay! But we needed it. We needed the rain. But I'm not going to talk about the weather because that's really, really boring, even if it is a hurricane.
Well, if you're a weatherman, that's the job.
If you're into meteorology, sure.
Yeah.
Most of our listeners are not.
They're not. But they are into church dynamics. And we're going to talk about U.S. megachurches, a constant dynamic, a constant idea in conversation. But before we do, Sam, tell them about our wonderful sponsor.
Yeah, church teams. Whether you are a megachurch or a small church, whether you're somewhere in between, church teams can serve you. I love what they offer in terms of church management software. Really, it's a full slate of resources that they can do. So if you have a software need or a systems need in your church teams can help you fulfill that. Whether it be, hey, we need something to help us, some sort of system to help us with discipleship. Well, church teams has it. Or just, hey, we need to be texting our people. In fact, good point. With this hurricane, we had to text our whole church to let people know that Wednesday night was canceled. Church teams can do that. And everyone read that message. So everyone got the message because just about everybody has texting. So classic case of why would I need to be able to text my church? Well, this is one case. So go to est.church. That's where you can learn more about what church team is offering you, the listeners of EST. 2 free months is what they're having there. So est.church, reach out to church teams, get started on text to church. They do a lot of stuff, but that's a really good one. And that's a good place to start with them among many other features. They have a scalable pricing model. So if you are a smaller church, there is an affordable plan for you. And if you are a larger church, they can scale with you, which is really cool. So thank you, Boyd. He's the co-founder. Really good guy. So when you get church teams, you also get a really good team at church teams. Boyd leads them, and we're very, very happy that they sponsor the show. So thank you, church teams. All right, Josh King, let's talk about this. Now, here's the deal. This mega churches get talked about a lot. They're often the target, right? They're, because they're so big, people talk negatively about them. And I get why. And you and I don't often bring in the concept of a megachurch into the discussion because our audience tends to be non-megachurch people. Let's just put it that way. So why are we talking about this now? And what relevance does it have to you, the listener, our audience? I think there's a lot happening in megachurches that is really not being reported that I think will affect other churches. So more on that here in a moment. But let's just start with, what is a megachurch? Josh, do you know? How do you define a megachurch?
Oh man, I hear the definition change every time I hear it. But the one that I assume, and you can correct me if I'm wrong, is averaging 2,000 or more in their small groups or Sunday school classes.
Oh, small groups, really?
Mm-hmm.
I've always heard worship attendance.
Yeah, my definition is harder to get to, but that's what I've heard. But yeah, I had heard worship attendance, then I heard small groups, so I can go with either. If you've got 2,000 people connected weekly in one of those environments, you're a megachurch for sure.
Yeah. I would say if you're averaging 2,000 in groups or averaging 2,000 in worship or both, that's the cutoff. Now, I have seen some people who do the stats on megachurches kind of try to change the definition, try to lower that number to like 1,800, 1,700. I think there's a reason behind that, which we'll get to that here in a moment. I'm going to go out on a limb here. And if anyone who has been reading my stuff or listening to what I have to say, I think this movement is waning. I don't think that if you even so at the time of this recording, and I know we tend to, these post about a month after we record them, but at the time of this recording, The Economist just put out, The Economist is a newspaper, or a magazine that it's just okay. I read it because a lot of other people read it, so I'm not necessarily condoning the left-leaning part of The Economist. Just for those of you who are like, has Sam gone woke on us? No, I have not. I'm not going to do that to you. But I do read it because every now and then I find something like, okay, that's a good point, and they do offer perspective that I think is valuable. But anyway, The Economist put out an article, and here's the title: American megachurches are thriving by poaching flocks.
I saw that. Article as well. And, I don't know how I feel about it. I am sure there's some data that's involved in it. I would go ahead and say I think poaching is the wrong word. So, and here's my perspective.
I'd say it might be the right word.
Well, we're a large church. We get accused of that. And we don't do that. We don't do that at all. And we never target other people. It's not like I'm sitting down at a coffee shop and I meet somebody, hey, how you doing? And they're like, what church do you go to? Oh, we go to small church down the road. And I'm like, you shouldn't go to that church. You should go to my church. My church is big. That has never once happened. Now, I can confirm to you, based on evidence, that the reverse has happened several times, not only to members, but also to musicians and volunteers. So I think the word is not the right word from at least my experience. There's a mega church here in my town, a very large mega church here in my town. I don't believe they're poaching anybody. So, but it's not conversion growth that's largely building some of these mega churches. So they are transfer growth. I just don't think it's intentionally poaching.
Well, I think you're generally correct. I give everyone a hard time here. It makes for good radio, right? But I think you're generally correct. I think a lot of these large churches, I don't think their motive is impure. But reality is reality. Facts are facts. The vast majority of megachurches did not grow because of conversion growth. They grew because people transferred in. Now, were they poaching? That's a harsh term, and it's a good headline term.
Oh, yeah. It's going to get clicks.
Yeah, and that's the point. I mean, so that's why the Economist wrote it the way that they did. And hey, we're talking about it, so the person who wrote that did their job. But the data in the article. So here's the kicker. The data in the article is pre-pandemic. This whole idea of thriving, it's old data. It's almost 4-year-old data.
Economist.
So it's
bad on you. Yes, Economist. That's not great. That's not a good idea.
Well, I mean, let's just be real. Journalism is a lost art. There are still some good ones that are out there, but by and large, newspapers and magazines are not employing true journalists. They're there to get clicks, not to get to the truth.
True.
But when you dig into the data in this particular article, they've got their numbers from 2015 to 2020, and I know this particular study that they're citing. That study came out before the pandemic, so. It's old data. And this is part of the problem when you're talking about the megachurch movement. A lot of the stats that you see quoted are pre-pandemic stats. So this idea of 1,750 megachurches or 2,000 megachurches, the number of megachurches, the megachurch peaked in terms of number of megachurches in 2012. 2012, we're talking 10 years ago.
Yeah.
Now, some of the biggest megachurches have gotten bigger. But in terms of there are X amount of megachurches in the United States, that number peaked in 2012. I estimate, and this is a real rough estimate, so this is not scientific. I want to be very clear. But I've done some chicken scratch math on the back of a napkin. And I would estimate that there are probably about 1,000 megachurches in the United States today. So
let me ask you a question.
It's a drop of like 50%, maybe 40% in terms of the number of megachurches.
So you said that the megachurches have gotten, the ones that are still around are larger than they were, right? And the number has gone down. Does that have any correlation to the rise or the increase of multi-siting? So if you were to take all the megas and chop off the multi-sites, would you get back to this number, or is it becoming fewer larger churches? Do those two things relate to one another, do you think, or what's
They
happening?
absolutely do. If you look
Okay.
at the list of the largest churches in the United States, almost all of them are multi-site. So if you
Okay.
do away with the multi-site phenomenon, you do away with the vast majority of megachurches. So part of the way that they've grown is by getting smaller. So this idea of big for big's sake is going away. And so the megachurches have grown because they've tried to get smaller, which is not a bad thing. I don't know that that's a bad strategy. But the movement, that right there tells you that the movement is waning. And it waned with the coming of age of the baby boomers. The mega church as a phenomenon, and I use that term phenomenon in a qualitative sense. So this is a technical term if you are a qualitative researcher. And if you're watching on YouTube, Josh just yawned. So his
Man, I'm
cue.
so it's
It's
the
his cue to
allergies.
me.
It's
I
the
says I say
allergies.
qualitative research, and he's like, yawn. Don't go
It's
there,
the
Sam.
allergies.
Don't do it.
I'm trying. I'm struggling.
So if you do a phenomenological study, that is a qualitative research paradigm, and the phenomenon that is megachurches was a baby boomer phenomenon. And as the baby boomers have got older and are, fading, I hate to say that. I mean, I like a lot of the baby boomer generation and what they do and what they stand for. But as this generation is fading, so is the megachurch. This idea that we're going to get like 5,000 people in an auditorium and we're going to build a 6,000 seat whatever. That's all baby boomer stuff. And that era is ending. So what's really happening now at the U.S. megachurches? They're still around. They're still big. Goodness, we're still talking about them. It's still there, but the movement itself has peaked about 10 years ago and is waning. What say you, Josh?
I'm curious. Can you name any mega churches that are no longer mega churches?
Oh, yeah.
Who are you thinking about?
Well, I could name a bunch of names that nobody would know. Like churches that were 2,500 pre-pandemic and are now 1,200 or 1,500.
Yeah, well, I guess that's true. I also heard once we got out of the pandemic that mega number was going to reduce because, it was always just a relative term. These are mega because they're very few. So if the majority of megas are now around 15 to 7. I'm just trying to think of the biggest churches I know. They're still the biggest churches I know.
Sure.
Some of them are even bigger. Now, granted, all of my big church knowledge truly just stems around the large Texas cities, which are not shrinking. They're exploding in growth, and so there's probably a lot of transfer, just move-in type of transfer that's going to keep these mega churches going a little longer than maybe some of your urban setting churches.
I would set Texas aside a little bit because of the demographic growth. So let's just clarify: if somebody's new to your community, that's not transfer growth. That's demographic growth. So
Right.
I want to redefine some terms. Just when somebody moves in, somebody moves here from, everyone's moving here from New York City, Chicago, and Los Angeles. That's just what's happening in Bradenton. And they want to join our church. We had our biggest membership class, the last one that we just did, just the history of our church. And there was a lot of new people to the community. I don't necessarily think that's transfer growth. Transfer growth to me is I was going to the church down the road and I just decided to come to your church.
Yeah,
which is how most mega
conversion
churches
growth.
grew.
Yeah, right. And I think that with the question about campusing, that may lead a little bit into the perception that there is poaching going on because of the way that campuses are established, the way that there's a dying church and a campus comes in. And to those not really familiar, or maybe those who are more upset about change than they are actually about megachurches, they may feel like that looks like a poaching situation. I have heard horror stories, can't confirm these, but I've heard some horror stories in which very, very multi-site churches, the kind of like pipe in the preaching and that sort of stuff, do intentionally target very large sort of traditional churches, and they'll set up shop across the street and essentially vacuum out the younger generations that they feel like this church is boring to me now, but this one is close to home, and it's got great children's programs. That kind of definition could be poaching. Again, I can't confirm that, but I've
Well, I can
seen
certainly
it.
confirm it. I've
Oh yeah.
seen it. We've experienced it at West Bradenton. There is a large megachurch in our region that put up signs in our church parking lot when they opened a new campus right down the road, and the signs said, "Don't go here." Basically, we're the cool church right down the road. This is where you really want to go now. I'm paraphrasing. The signs didn't quite say that. They were a bit more subtle than that. But in our yard, Josh King, as you're pulling into our parking lot, there were signs. Now they eventually got taken down, of course.
Of course.
And that was before my time. I was not at West Bradenton when that occurred. So does poaching occur? Absolutely, it occurs. I can confirm that. My church has experienced it. That being said, is it as pervasive as a lot of the critics say that it is? No, it's not. And do most megachurches do these sorts of things? No, they don't. Most of these megachurches are actually a lot of them are doing a lot of good, and people want to go there for a reason. But reality is reality. They still have grown by a lot of transfer growth. And so for them to claim that, one thing that I will push back on the megachurch is we're the church for the unchurched. No, you're not. You're the church for the baby boomers who want something big. You are not the church for the you're not reaching the unchurched. Stop saying that. Most of these, that whole idea of we're the church for the unchurched is maybe they think that that's their ideal, but that's not really what's happening in a lot of these churches.
Yeah, I can't speak to that. But you had other thoughts there. You had some other things about the megas.
Yeah, I mean, one stat that I found that I think is relevant and close to reality. Again, a lot of this data about the megachurch is hard to confirm because it's self-reported data. So you're relying on a lot of megachurches to tell you the truth about how many people are really there. And a lot of times they don't even know. They just estimate because it's so big. And a lot of large churches are also including online figures still with a multiplier. So, hey, for every one view, we're going to multiply that times 2.5 because, the average household size in the United States is roughly whatever, 2.5. And then we're going to include that in our figures. So you kind of have to be careful with what exactly is a real megachurch. I don't like the idea of including digital attendance just in your overall figure. This is how big we are. I think that's a bit misleading, particularly if you're applying a multiplier to your views. Right. A 10-second view gets a 2.5 multiplier, and that's going to be included in your attendance. I don't know that that's really an honest way to assess how big you really are. That being said, I did find one stat that I'm like, I think this is pretty close to reality. 50% of churchgoers attend the largest 10% of churches. And I've rounded up there with some figures. That's just a way to remember it. 50% of churchgoers attend the largest 10%. Now, the largest 10% are not megachurches. That's only a sliver. That's only like the top of the top of the top. But half of all people that go to church go to the largest 10% of churches. That to me rings true because 92% of churches are 250 in attendance and under. So the vast majority of churches are smaller, but there is a large swath of people, roughly half, that go to larger churches, not necessarily mega churches, but churches of 500, 600, 1,000, 1,500. I do think this is going to change, though. I think that if you are in a smaller church, let's say a church of 125, 150, which is double the median church size. So if you're in a church of 125, you're actually larger because you're bigger than the median. Median church size is 65, 70 people. But I think that this whole idea of work from home, local, millennials do not move, is the least mobile generation since we've been counting, in 100 plus years. I do think that there is a shift that is beginning to occur. We're certainly not full steam ahead with this movement, but I'm going to go to church in my neighborhood. Or at least I want to go to church in my neighborhood. I want to go to church closer. This idea of driving 45 minutes to the happening big regional megachurch is ending. That's ending. Now, people people aren't going to flock into your church just because you're in the neighborhood and you're smaller. You still have to do what you're supposed to do and do it well. So this idea that, well, the megachurch movement is waning, people are just going to start showing up. No, they're not. You still have to do church well in order to draw people in. But this concept of, well, we want to go to the megachurch, I don't think that's present in the millennial generation. I don't think it's present in Gen Z. I think that's more a baby boomer mentality.
I think that you're right, but you said it earlier. The mega churches that do capture that small feel, I think they're going to continue to hold ground and maybe even grow. So I've heard of large churches that have very big sanctuaries that have actually reduced the seating. Um, and it's still a large building, a large church, but reduce the seating, really emphasizing the small groups or the Sunday school classes, whatever you call them. Really getting into those neighborhood, they'll have like neighborhood parties and stuff like that. The more that can happen, they're going to continue to have those layers. All humans are built, to have these, your small group, less than 10, a larger group of 300, but then to be a part of something that's bigger than you can fathom, bigger than you could put in one room. And we experience that in sports. We have our friends that we watch sports with, but we also like to be part of Cowboy Nation or Longhorn Nation or whatever, the big, huge thing that we just can't really wrap our brains around, but it speaks to purpose and mission and goals. So I think if mega churches can really understand those group dynamics or those size dynamics, I think they'll hold ground. Now, I do agree with you, especially like urban sprawl has really become this thing where it's like you've got inner layers of suburban areas where they're not going to pass 3 or 4 layers of suburbs to get back to the old beltway and go to that church or the old loop or whatever, they call it. So that whole draw, I just think if large churches want to maintain their profit share or their, what do you call it when market share?
Market share.
Yeah, not profit
Let
share.
me know if churches start doing profit share, because I'll sign up for that. Because if your church wants to send me some money, that's what the Major League Baseball does.
Yeah,
that's what the SBC does. It's called socialism. So if you want to share some of that with me, then please feel free to.
Yeah, I used the wrong word. But if you want to contain that level of, you're going to have to think smaller. Make sure, push them into smaller groups, and have that personable feel. Those kind of things. It's going to, you'll continue to gain your influence or maintain your influence, which is a good thing. Because, like we always say, I'm not against any of this. I love the neighborhood church. I love the inner urban core church. I love the mega churches and I love the suburban churches. All of it works together as long as we're all working together. So they all have their place.
Yeah, I mean, and we talked about this with the deferred maintenance. We talked about deferred maintenance a while back, and we kind of mentioned that these large churches are really going to struggle with some major bills coming up if you've built this giant campus, and that's certainly true. But I do think that mega churches will always be around to some degree, just not to the degree that they are now, and that will happen through multi-site. Now, let me ask you this, and I'm actually a big fan of multi-site. We are a multi-site church. We have two campuses, six services, a couple of venues, 3 venues actually. So we're a multi-venue, multi-site church, and it's a model that we do. Whether or not we do it well, I mean, I don't know, but it's something that we're pursuing. Now we're doing it on a very micro scale because some of our services are 30, 40 people at West Bradenton. We have some larger services too. We have a big room where where the main campus is, but that being said, we do live preaching in all of these. I don't do video venues. So I am a multi-site fan, whether you're a small church pursuing it or whether you're a mega church pursuing it. I say, great, go for it. But I do not like the idea of video venue multi-site. What about you?
Yeah, I'd lean away from it for a couple of reasons. What I would say is I don't have strong feelings against it, but I have a strong preference for live preaching. I think that it maintains what we're talking about right here with the smaller feel. You're going to feel like you're connected to that person. So I like that. I think there's something about the preacher that's standing up there is this, he drives the same streets you drive, has the same taxes you, shops at the same grocery store. There's a connection there. So I like that. Furthermore, I like development of more preachers. And so you got to have more opportunities, more reps, more times for other preachers to get in there and learn. So I lean strongly towards live preaching. I'm not, as always, I'm not quick to say never pipe in the preaching, because there may be a season where that might be helpful. There may be special Sundays where everybody wants to hear from the whatever. I'll tell you, it just reminded me of something, Sam. One of the things that just sort of like, it's not wrong, but it bugs me, is the term global. Have you seen, this is in the corporate world as well. There's this little so we office downtown, and we have most of the second floor of this historic building. There's another offices here too, some people, and it's just a little tech company. It doesn't have any other offices or anything, but it's on the outside of their door. It says the global headquarters. And I'm like, I guess I'm the global headquarters here too. I'm the global pastor. It just, to me, global means around the world. Okay. So unless you're Coca-Cola or McDonald's, you don't really have a global headquarters. Ford does, but yeah. So these churches that are like, this is the global connections minister. And I'm like, dang, how many campuses? Just these two, it's like that. It's just a term that bothers me. Again, I'm not against it, but I just think it's funny.
Well, while we're on the subject of pet peeves, I'll share mine. By the way, I like, and by the way, the reason we're talking about this one, I do think it has impact for small churches, but it's also just interesting. People find these kind of topics interesting.
Well, yeah.
So I like what you said about video venue, and you may need it for a season, and that's certainly the case. I think if we need it for a season, fine. It's just not a strategy. Use it for a season if necessary. It's not a good strategy, and I'll go even one step further than you. Video venue. It's not anti-biblical, but it's lazy. It's just lazy leadership. It's, hey, we've got one good speaker. Why don't we train? There's no need to train up any others. Let's just pipe them in. That's just super lazy. There's no good case for we were talking about leadership development for video venue. There's none. You're telling me we got 25,000 people that go here. You don't have one of them that has the ability to preach or the calling to preach. Really? Yeah, so it's not anti-biblical. Some people, talk about multi-site and video venue and all that, and say, the critiques can be very harsh and unnecessary. And maybe some people think I'm being harsh here. I don't care. But I do think it's lazy. I think it's lazy leadership.
Yeah, I think a case could be made. I would just say that you need to use it least. It's a tool to use. I just wouldn't use it all the time. Like, maybe 20% of the time it's the same. It's that main top communicator. I do think that theoretically, here's where I can get there. Theoretically, I do believe that there are various degrees of preachers. This guy is better than that one. Just, it is the way it is. Has a better
You're
way
better
of
than I am.
Maybe, but
no, I think you are.
I mean, but if we were in the same location, it would be like, okay, so this one's better. So we're going to use those gifts in a certain way. But I would still say, but that's not the point. And I don't think that you need to, as a church, as a group, inadvertently communicate that that's the point. That natural skill is what matters. What matters is correct exegesis. What matters is making much of Jesus and teaching the text. That's what I would lift up. And you do that when the better communicator is sitting on the front row listening to what would be considered a lesser communicator, or when you're using live preaching in the venues and you rotate them around. And the better communicator sometimes is at the smallest venue. You communicate the quote unquote skill set, while might be our foot forward, it's not our only foot. So it might be your strongest foot, but you need 2 feet to stand. So, I think that there is a methodology, reasons why I wouldn't do it. You're communicating in a probably things you don't mean to communicate.
Good point. And we're just about out of time. So
That's
thanks
it.
for tuning in. I just this little rant from Josh and Sam on megachurches, and neither of us shepherd or pastor a megachurch. So if you happen to be in a megachurch situation and you're thinking you two don't have a clue, well, maybe we don't, but we still shared our thoughts with the world.
Hey, we like y'all. I do think that it's relevant. We talk about the small churches all the time. We talk about large churches. It all plays together, and we need to know how we can better play together and respect one another and just sharpen each other from different perspectives. So I think it's relevant.
Very good. Well, hey, thank you, Church Answers, for sponsoring the show. We do demographic reports. So if you go to churchanswers.com and you click on that link right at the top, this is demographic reports. We would love for you to have a Know Your Community report. It is one of our, if not the most popular resources that we have at Church Answers. It has a wealth of information. So if you haven't run a demographic report on your community of late, now is the time to do it. So go to churchanswers.com, click on demographic reports, and there's a whole bunch of explanation there as to what they are. But for the sake of time, I'll just let you go there and check it out yourself, and I'll let Josh check us out.
Yeah, make sure that you go run that demographics report. It'll help you out a ton as you reach your community. And thank you for listening. We hope that this show and other shows is edifying and helps you out. One of the ways that you can help us out is by letting your other ministerial friends, your other established church leaders know about the show and the conversation. You can do that in whatever way it is that you let your friends know. But the way I'm asking you to do today is to text them. So I know you're on a text thread with a couple of other preacher, pastor, minister buddies. Go ahead and drop that link in that text this week and let them know that you listen to the show and that it might help them out too. And we appreciate you doing it. We'll catch you next week.